Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. We are from the group 5 from 19DB. Our group consists of Azka Adilya R, Afifah Sabrina R, and Faza Hauna. In this opportunity, we are going to talk about language and mind. These are the topics that we are going to talk about today. There are psycholinguistic evidence, acquiring language, the content process controversy, the rule governing nature of child language, learning the meaning of words, doing it by hands, recognizing words, understanding syntax, speech production, speech disorders, and last but not least, language and the brain. These chapters looks at psycholinguistics and outlines three main topics. The first one is how humans acquire language. The second one is how humans understand speech. And the third one is how they produce it. It also discusses how the study of language and mind overlaps with that of language and the brain. Let's move on to the first topic. Psycholinguistic evidence. The mind cannot be directly observed, so psycholinguistics have to devise ways of finding out how it works. They get their evidence from two main sources: observation of spontaneous utterance and psycholinguistic experiments. Spontaneous utterance, which deviate from the norm in some way, are the most informative. We can learn considerably more from a child's mistakes, such as foot instead of feet, or someone who said geranium instead of hydrangea, then we can form a perfect flow of speech. However, ordinary speech is somewhat messy, in that there are dozens of different factors which have to be taken into account when utterances are analyzed. Psycholinguists therefore devise experiments in which the number of variable factors can be controlled, and the result can be accurately measured. The next topic is acquiring language. The so-called innocence question has been a burning issue over the last half-century. No detailed solution has yet been found to that question, but by examining them, we are slowly acquiring a greater understanding of the nature of human language. One point in particular has become clearer. Language has all the hallmarks of materially controlled behavior. It used to be thought that animal behavior could be divided into two types, that which was inborn and natural, and that which was learned and unnatural. It turns out, however, that this division is by no means clear-cut and may be misleading. Many types of behavior develop naturally at a certain age, provided that the surrounding environment is adequate. Human infants pay attention to language from birth. They produce recognizable words at around 12 to 15 months and start putting words together at around 18 months. The urge of language to emerge at this time is very strong, and only extraordinary circumstances will suppress it. A content process controversy has long been argued about in linguistics. Do children naturally contain linguistic information, or are they intelligent beings who have worked out how to process linguistic data? The realization that language is maturationally controlled means that most psycholinguists now agree that human beings are innately programmed to speak, but they cannot agree on exactly what is innate. In particular, they cannot decide to what extent, if any, language ability is separate from other cognitive abilities. On the other hand, There are those who support a process approach and argue that children could not possibly contain specific language universals. Instead, they are innately geared to processing linguistic data, for which they utilize a puzzle-solving ability which is closely related to other cognitive skills. A further group of people point to the social nature of language and the role of parents. Children, they argue, are social beings who have a great need to interact with those around them. This latter view is turning out to be something of an exaggeration. The fact that parents make it easier for children to learn a language does not explain why they are so quick to acquire it. Furthermore, language seems to be due to something more than a desire to communicate. There is at least one strange child on record who acquired fluent language, but did not use it to communicate. He spoke only monologues to himself and refused to interact with others. Increasingly, language is thought to be innately guide behavior. Humans are naturally turned into language. They instinctively pick out pitch sounds and know how to build them into linguistic grammar.
The rule-governed nature of child language. Children seem to be aware that language is rule-governed. Children are not like a parrot who simply imitating what they hear going on around them. And every child have a simpler grammar than adults. For example, when children first use negatives, they normally use a simple rule, like put no or not in front of the sentence. This rule is not applied in adult form. For example, no play that and no Fraser drink all tea. Then that rule is replaced by another rule. Insert the negative after the first NP. This is also not applied in adult forms, like doggy no bite and that no yummy. The other examples are they say man's, foods, gooses, but they understand and respond correctly to the adult forms like man, feet, and geese. Children, if they realize one of their own rules is unlike that of an adult, do not suddenly abandon the old rule. The old and the new fluctuate for a time until eventually the new takes over. Learning the meaning of words. Children have to learn not only syntax and sounds of their language, but also the meaning of words. For a start, it will be a little difficult for children to discover that words can refer to separate things. When they learn the meaning of words, children produce overgeneralizations, but they are not as common as undergeneralizations. Undergeneralization means the children using a word too narrowly. For example, only using cat for their own pet. And overgeneralization means the children using a word too broadly. For example, using cat to label cats, dogs, cows, and etc. Doing it by hand. The urge to communicate is strong in humans. For those who cannot hear, can be taught sign language. Sign language is a full language in every way, but it's important for children to start acquiring it young. Deaf children with deaf parents start signing earlier and quickly become more proficient than deaf children with hearing parents. And then, recognizing words. Humans recognize words by hearing a partial outline and then guessing the rest. For example, listeners were asked to interpret the following sentences, in which the first sound of the final word was indistinct. paint the fence and the 8. Check the calendar and the 8. Here's the fishing gear and the 8. The subjects claimed to hear gate in the first sentence, date in the second, and bait in the third. And the question is, how do speaker make the guesses? When someone had heard, she saw a dog, the human mind prefers parallel processing than serial processing. An interactive activation theory shows that the mind is a very strong network, so if there's a same word with the one that someone heard, it's automatically activated. Words that seem particularly appropriate get more and more excited, and those which are irrelevant gradually fade away. Eventually, one candidate wins out over the others. And the next one is understanding syntax. To some extent, the process is similar to word recognition, in that people look for outline clues and then actively reconstruct the probable message from them. In linguistic terminology, hearers utilize perceptual strategies. They jump to conclusions on the basis of outline clues by imposing what they expect to hear onto the stream of sounds. For example, consider the sentence, "The boy kicked the ball through it back." Most people who hear the sentence feel that there's something wrong with it, that there's a word left out somewhere, and that it would be the boy who kicked the ball threw it back, or the boy kicked the ball then threw it back. However, they realize that it's in fact perfectly well formed when shown a similar sentence. The boy thrown the ball kicked it back. The boy to whom the ball was thrown kicked it back. Speech production. It involves at least two types of process. First, words have to be selected. Second, they have to be integrated into the syntax. We can understand a lot about speech production by studying slips of the tongue. Two main kinds of slips are selection errors. It usually involves lexical items. The speaker has picked out the wrong item. The examples are, "Please hand me the tin opener." It should be nutcrackers. "Your seat's in the third component." It should be compartment. And the next kinds of slip is assemblage errors. When a correct choice has been made, but the utterance has been wrongly assembled. The examples are, "Dinner is being served at wine." It should be, "Wine is being served at dinner." And the next one is, "A copy of my paper." It should be, "A copy of my paper."
Speech disorders. Aphasia. Aphasic patients are difficult to classify because the image to the brain is hardly ever neat and tidy. The tissues may swell. Some areas likely to be starved of blood and oxygen, and the brain often tries to compensate in unpredictable ways. Anomia. Every patient's symptoms are slightly different, though almost all of them have difficulty in finding words. Anomia is a form of aphasia, in which the patient is unable to recall the names of everyday objects. Sometimes disorders are classified into broad types. Agrammatism. Agrammatism refers to language production that is lacking in grammatical structure. It because patient's speech appears to be without grammar, though the patient can mostly understand other people quite well and answer all the questions appropriately. Fluent aphasia.
These patients speak fluently, though they tend not to make sense. They also produce strange made-up words and often have serious problems comprehending what is said to them. Language and the brain. Human brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. Cerebrum is a large outer layer, while brainstem is an inner kernel. Brain is divided into two halves. It's called the cerebral hemispheres. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. Usually, the left is more powerful and dominant because it controls the right side of the body. Now, let's talk about history of language and brain. In the 19th century, Paul Broca, a French surgeon, stated that post-mortem showed that this area had been destroyed in the brain of two patients who could produce hardly any speech. Nowadays, the area is known as Broca's area. The damage on Broca's area can cause several speech problems. Now, let's talk about history of language and brain. In the 19th century, Paul Broca, a French surgeon, stated that post-mortem showed that this area had been destroyed in the brain of two patients who could produce hardly any speech. Nowadays, the area is known as Broca's area. The damage on Broca's area can cause several speech problems. Few years later, Karl Wernicke, a German neurologist, noted that several patients who talked fluent nonsense had severe damage toward the back of the brain, in an area under and surrounding the left ear. This became known as Wernicke's area, and fluent aphasics are sometimes said to be suffering from Wernicke's aphasia.